Welcome back to the Red Life podcast. My name is Karen, and today we're going to be talking about anti Asian racism and how it relates to anti China imperialism that is being done by the West, by the United States and its allies. So, last time, a few weeks ago, we had an episode. Our previous episode was on Xinjiang, China, and the misinformation that has been spread about this area and this region. Since that, I'll ask the other speakers to please mute yourselves if you don't mind.
Sorry.
That's okay. So since the last episode, we saw a really bad tragedy happening in Atlanta, Georgia, in the U.S., where there were a series of mass shootings that occurred at a few different spa or massage parlors in Atlanta, in the in the suburb of Atlanta, Georgia. 8 people were killed, out of whom 6 people were Asian women, and another person was wounded. And the suspect was a white man, a 21-year-old white man named Robert Aaron Long. He was taken into custody, of course, and then there were excuses that were made for him by the Atlanta sheriff, and it was said that he was just having a really bad day, or that he was a sex addict and things like that. And in fact, the authorities in Atlanta have downplayed the very real, obvious possibility that this was also a hate crime. There were also some anecdotal accounts of him saying stuff about Asians as he went around killing people. So this was a really horrible tragedy. It has seen an outburst of solidarity from a lot of people who are coming together to combat anti-Asian racism. There are actually protests and demonstrations being held this weekend as well as we do this broadcast. There are demonstrations out in various cities all over North America. We wanted to discuss specifically how the anti-Asian racism has increased in the last few years in the West, and especially in UK, US, and Canada. And we also wanted to speak about why that might be the case. What is it making this anti-Asian racism increase? And, what are some of the factors behind it? So we hope that you will join us. We have today, I want to introduce first my co-host, Moxie. Say hello, Moxie.
Hey, everybody. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We're really excited because we have Fiona back on. And many of you who watched our live stream with Fiona last time had really appreciated all of Fiona's insights into the discussion. So really great to have you back on. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, and we have Fiona, who is speaking to us from the UK. Hi, Fiona. So, let's start. Go ahead. Go ahead, Moxie.
Yeah, well, I thought we could. Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought last time we spoke quite a bit about the nature of imperialism and some of its characteristics, and that was kind of a thread throughout our episode. And one of the things that we kind of wanted to highlight today, and to start off the show with today, is racism is very much a symptom and connected to imperialism. So at home in the imperialist core, US, UK, Canada, is very much a symptom of that imperialist, those imperialist goals abroad, right? So when these countries are exporting their imperialist agenda, that's, they need to kind of manufacture consent, and one of those at home, and one of those ways to do that is to demonize whole groups of people, right? And we've seen this all the time, anytime there's wars happening. So, they often use human rights abuses as an example. Like in Syria, there was a chemical tax. In there was Gaddafi giving Viagra to his soldiers. And so, of course, there was all this outrage, like, oh, that's horrible. And then, of course, there was the Kuwait incubator baby stories, like all of these stories that are spread in the imperialist core, within the imperialist core, help to manufacture that hate, right, towards these groups of people. And we see this is what's happening today. This is what's happening now, right?
Mhm.
Like I think we have, let me just see if I can get some stats. Do you guys have any stats right in front of you? Let me just try and pull it up.
Well,
Okay, so in the past year, mhm,
Mhm.
I
No, go
think
ahead.
there's a delay on my end. I apologize, you
Yeah,
guys.
I think there
There's a
is.
little bit
I
of a
think there
delay.
is.
So in
Okay.
Canada, Vancouver has tracked anti-Asian hate crimes, and they have increased over 700% in Vancouver from 2019 to 2020. That's just in 1 year. Like, that's disgusting.
Mhm. So what I
In the
have is
United States, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna show a video about this very thing. So if
Oh,
that's okay with you.
good.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So just give me a minute. I'm gonna pop out the video page and then we can do that. So this is from CGTN. Um, okay. So I'm guessing you can see that. All right. So let's play
Yeah.
that video.
So, yeah, looks good. Need some sound.
Is the sound not working?
I don't think so.
Okay, hold on one second. Let me try it again.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Let me try one more time. Share audio. Duh. Okay. Let's try one more time. Whoops, whoops, whoops.
How's it going? What's going on with the sound? This is a great program too, The Point. I don't know if
Are,
anybody's
are
watching
you
our
not
stream right
hearing the
now. Like,
sound still?
no, no
Fiona,
sound.
are you hearing the sound?
No, still not working on my end either.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know what's happening. I shared the sound.
Okay.
Let's try it one more time. I'm going to try a different way.
Mhm. And if it doesn't work, maybe we can just share the link for folks to.
Yeah. While we do set this up, I just want to remind people, if you are watching on YouTube, please remember to share, to subscribe to our channel. If you're watching on Facebook, remember to follow our page, like our page. If you are on YouTube, you can also like the video. That's going to help spread the word about the video. So if you can do all of that, that would be great. So I'm going to see if we can share the audio this time.
A series
Are
of
you able to hear
mass
the audio
shootings
now?
occurred in spas
Yeah,
in
can hear it.
Atlanta, Georgia on March the 16th. 8 people were killed and 1 wounded. The suspect, a 21-year-old white male, was taken into custody later that day, charged with 8 counts of murder. Despite the fact that 6 of the 8 victims were Asian women, local law enforcement hasn't called the mass shooting a hate crime, meaning a prejudice-motivated crime that targets someone because of their membership or perceived membership of a certain social group, religion, or race. The local law enforcement spokesperson, Captain Jay Baker, offered his own insights into the crime, saying that the suspect was pretty much fed up and kind of at the end of his rope. Yesterday, he said, was a really bad day for him, and that's what he did. A sex addiction was suggested as the motive. When asked if the shooting might have been a hate crime, Atlanta Police Chief Rodney Bryan responded, "We're still early in this investigation, so we cannot make that determination at this moment." The responses have triggered a cascade of criticism. Some say the comments come across as justification for mass murder. Others say the allusion to the shooter's alleged sex addiction sounds like victim blaming. And yet others say the empathy shown for the shooter is one more example of white privilege and a systemic refusal to acknowledge that racism exists in American society. Many of these points were raised in a commentary piece from Rolling Stone called "The Excuse We Make for White Male Murderers." The article says the local law enforcement press conference inadvertently demonstrated the lengths to which people in this country will go to justify or even excuse the reprehensible actions of a white man, particularly one whose victims were marginalized members of society. The article adds that by telling the media that the attack did not appear to be racially motivated, the officer, intentionally or not, erased the complex and interlocking issues of racism and misogyny that could exist at the heart of the attack, and that by emphasizing that the victims allegedly tempted the shooter, law enforcement officials made the women complicit and were then also able to downplay any perceived racial bias behind the attack. By the way, no evidence has emerged that any of these victims were engaged in sex work. Even if they were, does that have anything to do with the value of their lives? Now, regardless of these debates, it would be a mistake to look at these cases as an isolated incident. Earlier in February, a shocking video showed a 91-year-old Asian man violently shoved to the ground in Oakland, California's Chinatown. In late January in San Francisco, an 84-year-old immigrant from Thailand was fatally assaulted and later died. In another case, a 75-year-old Chinese-American woman was punched on her face while waiting to cross a road, yet she managed to hit back at her attacker with a wooden stick. According to police data released by the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University in San Bernardino, although overall hate crimes in the 16 American cities profiled dropped by 7% in 2020, anti-Asian hate crime rose by 150%, and New York City saw a spike of 830%. Unfortunately, it's not just in the US. In the UK, figures from the London Metropolitan Police show over 200 incidents of hate crime against people of East Asian appearance reported just between June and September 2020, almost doubling year on year. In Australia, according to a poll by a think tank, 1/3 of the Chinese Australians said they have been called offensive names. Less than 1/5 said they have been physically threatened or attacked. In Canada, Vancouver police data shows anti-Asian hate crimes rose from a dozen in 2019 to 140 in 2020, an over 700% increase.
Yep.
So I thought that was a interesting summary of what I would like to discuss today, which is what is going on with there's a lot of people, there's a lot of discourse going on the liberal left and the liberal and left side about anti-Asian racism, and there's a lot of this like, oh, don't attack Asian Americans just because you don't like China kind of thing going on, where people are trying to actually dislocate they're trying to actually take attention away from imperialism and trying to say that somehow the lives of Asian Americans matter, but lives of Asians in Asia don't matter as much, which is, I think, what I get out of that, which is that once you come to the Americas or to Canada or to UK, and once you become a citizen, then you matter, but until then you don't really matter. And I don't know, what do you think about that, Fiona?
I think it comes as no surprise really that a lot of liberal discourses are you able to, yeah, focus on, on the fact that these women who died, they were Asian American, or that the people who were attacked were Asian American. Like, the emphasis is very much on the American part, and they just happened to be Asian, which I feel like it really detracts from the point of why these hate crimes, these so-called hate crimes, I say so-called because hate crimes is a very, it's a very legal, it's a legal term wrapped up in a very, a racist legal framework anyway. But with regards to violence against the Asian community, it detracts away from the reason that they have become targets in the first place. You'll see that, elderly people, elderly women in particular, have made up the grand majority of the cases across the US, and to some extent to the UK as well, where I think it was 2/3 of victims have been women, Asian women. And I just feel that when we focus on the fact that these people were British, or these people were American, or these people were Australian, for example, it just serves this whole idea of, what is it, the American dream, that we can all be assimilated as part of the society if we really wanted to be, and it's just a blip that we aren't, rather than interrogating why is it that so many Asian communities exist in the West in the first place. Because for the grand majority of it wouldn't have just been a choice of luxury, you get up and move to another country. It would have been, they would have fled from war-torn countries, driven to the depths by imperialism, by war, by no choice of their own. They thought that the West was the most successful place, the place where they could be most successful, for whatever reason, because of the lies of, again, the American dream, of this notion that the colonizing countries were able to provide a life that they couldn't seek back home in the motherland across Asia, for example, Southeast Asia in particular. Again, because of imperialism, because of the pillaging and the extraction of resources, from rubber in Malaya to the occupation of Korea, to the colonization of China from, various different countries. China has never been, colonized as an entire country, you could say, but it's been broken up so many times by the British, by the Portuguese, by the Japanese. It's one of those elements of history that I think gets brushed over very quickly and very easily. And it's a shame, really, that we don't talk about this history enough.
Yeah. And I think that there is a history of anti-Asian racism. This is the other thing, is that I feel like there's a lot of, and Moxie and I were talking about this, there's a lot of discourse right now that basically this is Trump's America. This is something to do with Trump. Like, first of all, Trump is gone. Like, he's not even whatever. And secondly, he's not even president anymore. And secondly, like, the Japanese internment camps and the Chinese Exclusion Act, these were all before Trump was even born, right? Or at least a long time ago. So, and in Canada too, the anti-China legislation, anti-Chinese legislation and stuff like that, there was a lot of that's been going on for decades, for like 100 years or more in some cases. So, I mean, this is not anything new. And I feel like, a lot of times it's brushed under the surface. And, I was listening to this, actually this really interesting episode of Daniel Dumbrell, Daniel Dumbrell. Yeah. I'll see if I can find a link to his, the episode I was listening to. But it was him and Carl Jha, and they were talking about anti-Asian racism. And also Teen, from Plan A magazine, Teen. Anyway, so they were talking about how there is this sort of model minority myth, right? Which is when it comes to Asians in the West, which is that somehow Asians are just a model minority and really easily assimilated and integrated within the larger white Western society, and just like good workers, diligent, hardworking, studious, and it's applies mostly to East Asian, this stereotype, and Southeast Asian, but some of it goes into the South Asian part too, which is where I'm from. So there's, Asian doctors and things like that, Indian doctors. So it kind of it's a spectrum, I think, of that kind of stereotype, how it applies to different Asians. But that kind of hides some of that, the racism that is faced by Asians. and how some of the, even some Asians can become it can become hard for some Asians to even confront it, because it's so much easier to be, to fall into the model minority myth, right? Is it the same case in UK, would you say, Fiona?
In the UK, yeah, absolutely. It's still this mentality, even throughout personally throughout my schooling era. It's this myth that is perpetuated, obviously, not only just by white people, but it becomes ingrained in the Asian consciousness to the point where people say it's culture. People say, oh, it's just all Asian parents are naturally like that. But when you interrogate it, a lot of it is self-perpetuating, in that we are made to feel that this is, these ideals are ingrained in us. We are born with them, even if they aren't. So it's our duty to sort of like upkeep them and, follow them, even if they don't make sense, considering the enclaves. Even in London, for example, there are multiple areas of London which are heavily dominated by East and Southeast Asians, and these are some of the most impoverished boroughs in the whole of London. And obviously, this doesn't match up with the model minority myth of all Asians becoming doctors. And yes, sure, they do make up a high proportion of people going to medical school, but you do have to take into account as well, a lot of these students will be international students. A lot of these students will come from perhaps middle class backgrounds where their families have been perhaps in the UK for generations and generations, and they have been able to develop a certain amount of wealth, which isn't afforded to the great majority of, Asian, British people, Asians, in this country, which again, I just feel that a lot of this history is completely missed out, and you don't tend to focus on the fact that the majority of Southeast Asians, for example, the work they make up is some of the most underpaid, low wage work in the whole of the UK, whether it's as cleaners or as sort of like very low band nurses, for example.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Moxie.
very
I think the delay
No,
is gone now.
Oh, really? Oh, that would be great. But I'm a little delayed sometimes, like on a Saturday as it is, it's like Saturday, I'm tired. But, I think those are really important points too. And I think as a white coated person, those are things that I've certainly seen from the other side of the situation in Canada. There's no question. And Canada has a long history of anti-Asian racism, a long history of that, and essentially slavery too, with Chinese workers building the railways here. But I think I think the stereotypes is, again, like just part of those symptoms of keeping people in their place, keeping minority or marginalized groups in their place. Let's stereotype them in a certain way so that they can either be better or be more silent, less resistant to, if that makes any sense. I don't know if, do you know what I'm trying to get at here? Like, it's stereotyping groups of people, puts them in their place. I think that's just to sum it up, right?
Yeah.
And it absolutely plays into these whole like demonizing types of behaviors that we see with imperialism and racism too.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing is that the way that it works is that you don't even have to be, we see that this, well, we're going to get into how the anti-China hate in particular feeds into the narrative, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things that I find interesting is that you don't even have to be Chinese. You can be Thai, Korean, Malaysian. Like, you could be anything that anybody that to a racist looks like an East Asian, and that's it, or to a racist looks Chinese. But like, what is it that about the Chinese ethnicity or nationality in particular, Fiona? Do you want to get into that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know if you wanted to save this a bit till later, but I guess especially within the UK, the history of yellow peril is you know, is deeply rooted in British sort of society, and hence also like US Canadian history, where, you know, Chinese historically, I don't know how many people know of the century of humiliation that China underwent, in which they were, you know, primarily the targets of aggression by the colonizing forces. So at the time it was like Portugal, Britain, and US to some extent, in which things like there were 2 opium wars during the century of humiliation, plus the seizure of Hong Kong, the occupation and colonization of Hong Kong, of Macau as well. And it's all of these sort of historical and very important historical points in which China was subjugated to imperialist aggression, not just physically, not just again on Chinese land, on Chinese territory, but also in the homelands. Back in Britain, you would see that the Western press spent a lot of energy, a lot of money dedicated to promoting a certain myth about the Chinese man, about this mystical Oriental being that would come and steal all your belongings, that was here to invade, that was a secret sort of force in society that was trying to destroy and tear it apart. And there are various cartoons that you can see if you literally just search up Yellow Peril online, of Chinese people depicted as rats, as mice, as diseases. And even The Economist, for example, if you just search up any of the current sort of covers now on China, you will see this tradition has carried on right into today, and there is no shame. They post sort of pictures of President Xi as a dragon. They perpetuate this whole myth that Winnie the Pooh is banned in China because people make fun of President Xi and say he's Winnie the Pooh. It's like all these very subtle things that don't seem like they're a big deal, but it's just sort of like it's become so much ingrained in our culture that whenever we think of China or Oriental or anyone of the quote unquote Far East, instantly you are bombarded with this certain idea of a person, this certain idea of an entire people, which isn't grounded in any truth, but has been founded on essentially imperialist propaganda, which hasn't ended. It may have been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. It may have been exacerbated over the past few months, perhaps, with Trump's whole, you know, when people say, oh, it's all because of Trump and his whole demonization and calling of COVID-19 as, what was it, the China virus, the Kung flu, etc., etc. Yes, that language is derogatory. Yes, that is obviously not helped. But all it's done is just embolden people to say what they feel, to say what they think. It doesn't mean they haven't been thinking this for the longest amount of time. And I just feel like, especially we're going to go into obviously the impact of imperialism, but you'll see in a lot of Western countries, particularly over the last 10 years or so, the views towards China and specifically Chinese people has significantly dipped further and further, with more calls for to stop China, to prevent China from growing, to hinder its growth. And again, it's no different to what happened 100, 150 to 200 years ago, when there were these very same fears.
I'm just going to, while you speak, I'll just show some of the images that you were, I think, referring to. Like this kind of stuff.
Yeah, this is an excellent thread, to be honest, because it really does show that this sort of imagery, it's not questioned. For some reason, these press outlets, these news outlets, they feel like it's perfectly okay to produce this imagery because it's telling the truth. You know, China is this evil dominating force that's come to collect its bounty from all these innocent other countries in the global south, and terrorize, you know, the kingdoms of the UK and the US. So again, it's all these images that get put in your head, and it's all part of this, manufactured consent in a way, of making you feel.
Perfect propaganda is art, the use of imagery, right? So that it is powerful propaganda. And look at that. That's like, oh God. Sorry, it's just so sickening. Seriously.
This is The Economist. This is not Trump. This is The Economist.
Yeah. Oh my God. And that's the thing. It's like, these are like liberal supporting type of news sources and media sources, right? Like they aren't this like wicked, Trump propagandist type places. These are like liberal newspapers and news sources.
Yeah.
We want to give credit to Ian Goodrum for this excellent thread. I'll post a link to that too.
He is an excellent person to follow. He really I like the connections he makes on his Twitter feed, like for like this thread, for example.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of stuff has an effect on people. I don't see how anyone can see this and not think that this has some effect on people, who are reading these things.
I mean, it's almost like advertising as well, isn't it? Because, with advertising with brands, for example, you don't think that adverts affect you. But if you think of Apple, of Nike, of Adidas, of, Microsoft, of all these big brands, the only reason why we all buy into them, why there are like thousands of people who queue up for the new iPhone, or why everyone has to get the latest upgrade all the time, is because it's ingrained in our very culture, in everything that we see promoted, that these brands are the best brands. Yeah. A message is being sent out to us all the time. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's just how marketing works. And
psychologists like Carl Jung also talked about that. Like, he has a few books on it, actually. Like, a lot of his practice and in studying psychology is like looking at how we interpret symbols and the power of symbols and imagery. And throughout history of humans, like, we have these massive associations to symbols and powers. Like, that's why we got flags, and why the Red
New York
Star
Times.
is really a great symbol for us. Sorry. Yes, the Red Star. Yeah, but they're like, wow.
Yeah. So I definitely recommend following Ian Goodrum if you don't already do so.
Yeah, I think it's also quite interesting in terms of, the voices who do speak up on this. Only a certain demographic of them get a platform. Like, don't get me wrong, Ian Goodrum, for example, does some really excellent work on China and making sure that, the propaganda that is spread out about it is combated, and he provides an alternative view. But if you do notice, the people that get platforms about China to debunk the myths about China, they do tend to be cis white men, because they are seen as the authority and an authority on all matters, regardless of whether they're experts or not, which also obviously gives rise to the China watches, which I'm sure we all know about, of all those YouTubers who are just random white men, essentially. And for some reason, they're all taken as experts, not by any credentials, not by any sort of way of them being, professionals that have studied, researched China for years and years. They're literally just people who make up things on the spot. They can attach a caption to a picture. They can maybe speak a few words of Chinese, and suddenly they're all knowing figures that we're all meant to believe. And if you try and challenge that, you become a China watcher. You become what is it, a dengist, they say, a tanky, all these sorts of derogatory words, like that. They might not seem like they mean a lot, but it is a way of basically blocking any criticism of the critiques of China that people may have.
And just like last episode, we talked about the idea of being called a genocide denier when you're looking deeper into these claims, right? It's all connected. Kieran, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that the only Chinese people that are allowed to speak in the sphere are people who are speaking up for Western chauvinism and white supremacy. Right. So you have your Michelle Chens and your Jason Wong. Am I getting that right? Yeah. And these people who weaponize their identity in order to serve Western chauvinism. As long as it's the same thing like Venezuelans who are willing to sell out Venezuela, and people in Venezuela, as long as they're willing to as long as they're willing to say, I'm Venezuelan and I'm anti-communist, their voices are heard. But every other Venezuelan or every other Chinese person, 95% of Chinese people support the Communist Party of China, their government. And this is according to a Harvard study. I'll see if I can find a link to that. This is according to a Harvard study, not some tanky study. But, apparently that's still not good enough. And people still think they can say, we're against the Chinese government, not the Chinese people. Well, the Chinese people are for the Chinese government. So what are you talking about? But anyway, yeah.
No, I think that's a very important point, to be honest, because whenever you say something remotely pro-China, even if it's something neutral on China, to be honest, like China Daily, for example, they post a lot of panda videos. There's instantly this association with you as a Chinese shill. But if you think about it, with those statistics, you're saying that, well, 95% of the Chinese population are all shills for the CPC. I mean, what sort of point are they trying to make when it's pointed out that, if you support China, then you shouldn't be trusted? Because, as you said, the majority of Chinese people do support their government, and there are 90 million CPC members. So, and 90 million is a huge number that's bigger than the entire population of the UK and Ireland put together. So you're essentially dismissing the views of, two countries worth of people who are actual members of the party, let alone everyone else who supports the country, regardless of their membership to the Communist Party of China. And it just goes to show that if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Whatever it is that China does, there's nothing it can do, right? There's nothing.
Yeah. Do you want me to show the graphs that you had shared, Fiona?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure.
Okay. All right. So these are some images that Fiona had shared about the. Let me see. Here we go. So that's one of them.
Yeah. So this is a Pew Research study. It's done by Laura Silver, Kat Devlin, and Christine Huang. So again, this is not just a study done by some tankies or whatever. It is legitimately a study that's been done to recognize how the view on China negative views on China have steeply risen. And yeah, it is predominantly from the Republican side of things, but as you can see, it has significantly increased even on the Democrat side of things. So for Democrats, in favorable views of China have risen by 10 points. On the Republican side, this has been risen by, I believe, I can't do maths, 27 points. And in general, it's just a general uptick in a cold feeling towards China, hostility towards China. And of course, that naturally extends to the Chinese people. There is no way to separate China from the Chinese people. There are 1.4 billion people. That's a great proportion of the world's population to ignore on all manner of things. And as you said, as I think Moxie just posted, actually, well, people who support Trump and people who support the Democrats, the Republicans, whatever, it's bipartisan. There is a bipartisan hatred and hostility for China. They take almost the same platform. It's just in the way they present it that is a little bit different. But at the end of the day, Biden is the one overseeing, I think, the U.S. Navy Force, one of the U.S. military departments. They have proposed a $27.4 billion plan for an island missile chain, I think they're calling it, in the Indo-Pacific. So basically on a bunch of islands surrounding China. And if that's not imperialist aggression, if that's not, warfare, if that's not a call to war, then I don't know what is.
Yeah.
This is the thing. It's like we mentioned that in our last episode too, and we'll be sure to link to the last episode because I think we hit on a lot of really good points that you just made in that last episode as well. There is massive threat for this Cold War to turn into a hot war. Like China is a force in the world right now, and the United States, like an economic force, it really is. And the United States is absolutely terrified of that, and they want to maintain their economic bully profile in the world. And if that's threatened, that's really extremely dangerous to them. And the pivot towards China that Obama put in place in the Obama administration, that's when this really, what we're seeing today really started. Like really, that's when it really started to get amped up. And he started to surround China. It was Obama. Like, this like glorified Obama that the Dems love to glorify. But, he has like, there was a lot of war machinery and war hawking happening under him too. It's not just Trump. And, and the Trump really played into, the racist narratives in a more overt way, no question, especially around COVID, but he as soon as he got in, he was like ready to attack China and do like this trade war, the trade war aspects, which I would love to talk further about at some point too, just even for my own learning. But, and then COVID hits and he's like, every time he mentioned COVID, he called it the China virus, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like that is really overt racism at that point. And Biden, since he's been in power, hasn't really done anything to change that narrative either. He hasn't. He's not. He's furthering it, and then now all of these lies and disinformation, and extreme dis and misinformation campaigns that are happening against China and the so-called human rights abuses. That's going to further all of these things too, right? Because I think somebody mentioned in the chat they love to use human rights abuses as a way to sort of manufacture consent for war at home.
No, absolutely. I mean, if Australia in that graph we just had there, so according to the latest study as of October 2020, so 81% now see China unfavorably. And this is a country where as recently as I believe it was January, there have been reports that 1 in 7 Asians living in Australia have experienced some form of hate crime, violence, or otherwise sort of derogatory experience as a result of their race. So again, it's this, and when we say Asian, it's particularly East and Southeast Asian. Right. So it's anyone who is, as Kieran was saying earlier, it's anyone who is racialized as Chinese, it's anyone who's perceived to be Chinese, because, in the eyes of white supremacists, in the eyes of the average white person, to be honest, all Asians look the same. There is no distinction. Like, just because someone says they're from Thailand, well, it doesn't really matter. And even if you say, oh, I'm not Chinese, there is this mentality with a lot of liberals, with a lot of liberal Asians in the diaspora, for example, to distance themselves from China. But that doesn't tackle the root cause. Like, nobody cares that you're actually Vietnamese or Korean or not Chinese. The fact of the matter is, you look Chinese, therefore in their eyes you are the enemy. It doesn't matter what your actual values or stances are. And that's an important reason why we need to have solidarity with China. There is no other way around it. Just yesterday, Boris Johnson made a tweet, and I believe it was something condemning the sanctions that China has put on UK officials who have propagated the forced labor in Xinjiang sort of rumors, and just in general, a lot of the disinformation they've been putting out. And if you just see the comments under that, all you see is this vitriol, not just for China, China government, it's for the Chinese people, because they are one and the same. And I feel like when we try to separate them, when the left especially tries to separate them, like figures such as, Wilfred Chan from Lausanne says, it seeks to further divide and conquer. It allows the colonizers to further separate and segregate our communities. And again, it all ends in aggression. It all ends in war. There's no happy ending to this if we suck up to the colonizers' definition of imperialism, of hostility that they're saying China is enacting around the world.
Yeah, this whole thing about whether you're Thai or Vietnamese or Korean, you're going to get marked as Chinese in the eyes of racists, or even just the average non-Asian person. I think, a lot of people, have that built in because white supremacy has been globalized, really. This reminds me of like right after 9/11, right after September 11, 2001, there was a lot of anti-Muslim hatred and Islamophobia, and people who were marked as Muslim, even if you were not Muslim, right? So if you were Sikh, a lot of people who were attacked were Sikh people, if you were brown or had a beard or, just looked like a brown person, even some Latino people were attacked. So if you were marked as Muslim, you were attacked. And racists don't care if what kind of Muslim you are, whether you are a Muslim, whether you just are an atheist, but you were born Muslim, whatever, they don't care. Right. So it's a similar thing as what's going on, I think, with the East Asian, Southeast Asian hatred right now, that they're marked as Chinese. And so even if you're not Chinese, you are getting affected by anti-China hatred right now. I think this is just something that, we have to see in in the larger picture. We might see these distinctions between us. Well, somebody so-and-so is Korean. Many of the people who were killed in Atlanta were Korean, right? They weren't even Chinese. I mean, I'm not seeing, and what you're talking about, Fiona, is that there is this instinct among some people to say, well, I'm not Chinese. It's almost like I'm one of the good Asians.
Yeah,
you know?
like don't put me there, please. But I
Yeah.
think with Fiona, the
Local
point you made
minorities.
about the importance of solidarity with China as Asian Americans or Asians living in the UK, Canada, is like really critical. Like if you're wanting to, find or combat, I guess, the kind of racism that's happening at home in the imperialist core.
Absolutely. Yeah, in my opinion, obviously the violence against Asians in the diaspora is horrific. It's horrendous. There's no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, it is gearing up for something. It is gearing up. It's gearing up the public.
Yep.
It's gearing up the public for, as you said, from turning a cold war into a hot war. And who will suffer from this? It is, again, those living in the global south. It will be the
Yep.
the 1.4 billion on the Chinese mainland. It will be the millions of Asians across the continent who will inevitably get caught up in any sort of hot war. This is the exact situation we're trying to avoid. So in distancing ourselves again from China, from the Chinese government, you're basically saying that the Chinese people deserve to suffer. They deserve to die under the boot of imperialism, because your morality somehow distances you from whatever imaginary crimes you believe they're committing. That your morality or your ethics, whatever it is you believe in, is causing, the laborers in Xinjiang, the workers of Xinjiang, to lose their job, to lose their income, to risk falling back into poverty after the entire country has been alleviated and free of absolute poverty just this past year. It is literally jeopardizing all that China and Chinese people have worked so hard to achieve over the past century or so, particularly following the world wars and the founding of the People's Republic of China.
And to all those liberals out there who like to call themselves peace activists and, live, love, laugh, all their cheesy little fucking Etsy style shit. They're like, oh, peace, peace, we love peace, we love peace. And then they're going and they're trumpeting these anti-Asian, anti-China specifically, spreading the misinformation, believing the misinformation, believing the lies, not doing their own research into these kinds of things. They are promoting a potential hot war here. And they need to remember that. When you're not being critical about imperialist propaganda and looking at it as that, you are potentially supporting a potential hot war, and you are certainly furthering this Cold War by not doing your own freaking digging and research. And there's enough good information out there. Your channel is excellent, Fiona. Your channel is excellent on Twitter for that. There's Daniel Drumbill. There's the Gray Zone. There's where else? Help me out here. There's so many. CGTN.
Yeah. I mean, all of Lucian's sort of headline buster, her entire series, it's excellent. It's all very sort of impartial, in my opinion, very impartial, objectively scrutinized and analyzed. Just facts. And
that's on CGTN.
That's on CGTN. Perfect.
Yeah, I highly recommend CGTN. They have really good shows, and a lot of them, a lot of times, they will have people who are critical of something to do, some policy that China has, or something, something that would happen. They're not just like automatons, which is the freaking stereotype which is out there. I also wanted to play. Speaking of the I wanted to play this video. There was right after the Atlanta shootings, there was a anti-Asian hate rally that was held, and right away at the same time, there showed up a bunch of anti-China demonstrators. I mean, like in a car caravan, and they were showing. Well, I'll show the video. Some of you might have seen it already, but I'll show the video. Just one second. Let me pull that up. I highly recommend following Max Blumenthal if you don't already do so. So that's I'm going to post the link here in case you want to follow the link yourself. So this video, let me just pull it up here. Let's watch it and then we'll talk about it. So Max's comment here was that this is the World Uyghur Congress. Constituents taken to the streets to heckle anti-racism demonstrators. This network of right-wing U.S. government-funded exile supplies practically every testimony that the U.S. media relies on for its information war on Xinjiang. Okay, let's play it.
China! Wake up the people! Stop the genocide! No concentration camp!
So a bunch of white MAGA people apparently really care about China and the Muslims in China. Who knew? Who knew the same people who support the Muslim ban that Trump had would really all of a sudden start caring about Muslims in China, right?
Yeah.
I thought that video was let me just stop sharing it. Okay. I thought that video was quite telling, and that they showed up with these signs about, you know, these like East Turkestan flags and things like that, you know, the blue flag, right? You saw that video when it first came out, Fiona?
Yeah, I know, I did. I didn't make my way through the whole lot of it because it was just, you know, it was just one of those things. I was like, it's so typical. It's so typical, sort of American, isn't it? This whole facade, this whole performance that they apparently care about the lives of Uyghur people in thousands of miles away in Xinjiang, when, you know, I don't want to say it, but I'm going to say these people are probably the ones committing violence against people of color in their own communities here at home in the US. And yet they're claiming to champion the cause for people like thousands of miles away. In fact, it kind of reminds me of even the Hong Kong protests, where, you know, you had members of the Proud Boys, you had members of the, I think it was the Azaz battalion from a far-right group in Ukraine. You had all these far-right figures suddenly caring about freedom and democracy in Hong Kong. When, again, at home, they are far-right fascist nationalists, but the fact that they were all showing up to support tells you very something about the movement that they're supporting. It tells you that the interests, the agenda of the movement is not legitimate. It is not fighting for a just cause. It is not fighting for a fairer, more democratic future, or to stop human rights abuses, as these groups claim. It is merely furthering the agenda of essentially the far right, of the imperialists, of the colonizers. I mean, just think about again, with the free Hong Kong protests, just think about how many people were essentially saying that Hong Kong belongs to Britain, that Hong Kong should still be colonized and shouldn't be a part of China, no matter what these people say about, oh, independence this, independence that. That's not what they want. And it's the same with Xinjiang. They're not really concerned about the independence of Xinjiang. They're basically saying they want Xinjiang to be a vacuum for war, for proxies, for the CIA, for the US military, for ISIS, for all these forces to come and destabilize it and essentially just ruin the lives and destabilize an entire region just for the colonizers to part up and balkanize. That's all these claims of independence for fights for freedom really are.
Right. Well, as far as Xinjiang, I'm going to show another video here. This is with Colonel Wilkerson. I think that's the name. Some people might have seen this video as well, but I just want to share it for the people who might not have seen it. So here, this one explains a little bit about why the U.S. Cares so much about Xinjiang. So I'm going to play that here. Just one second.
There's always.
Sorry. We're in Afghanistan as we were in Germany post-World War II, because it is the only hard power the United States has that sits proximate to the Central Base Road Initiative of China that runs across Central Asia. If we had to impact that with military power, we are in position to do so in Afghanistan. The second reason we're there is because we're cheek and jowl with the potentially most unstable nuclear stockpile on the face of the earth in Pakistan. We want to be able to leap on that stockpile and stabilize it if necessary. And the third reason we're there is because there are 20 million Uyghurs, and if the CIA has to mount an operation using those Uyghurs, as Erdogan has done in Turkey against Assad, there are 20,000 of them in Idlib in Syria right now. Well, the CIA would want to destabilize China, and that would be the best way to do it, to foment unrest and to join with those Uyghurs in pushing the Han Chinese and Beijing from internal places rather than external.
So this is Colonel Wilkerson. He was, I think, chief of staff for Colin Powell, who who helped sell the Iraq War
video. Wow.
Yeah,
I hadn't seen that before. That's excellent. Like
Yeah.
he just like, there you go. You just explained what's happening right now. Thanks for that.
right.
Yeah.
So, they don't care about Muslims. They don't. I mean, the same country that has been bombing Muslims in Libya and Yemen and Afghanistan and Pakistan and Iraq, and has been sanctioning Muslims in Iran. These same
Somalia.
people care about Muslims in Somalia and Libya. They care about Muslims in Xinjiang all of a sudden. I mean, give me a
Yeah.
fucking break. Give me a fucking break. And I think most Muslims are very aware of this hypocrisy, and most Muslims are not buying it. We're not buying it. So, let's see. There's a couple of questions in the chat here. First of all, thank you so much, everybody who's watching. We love you. Thank you so much. Please share the video. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have any other comments or questions, feel free to type them in. We can see them here. We can address them. So one of them was that Yuri is asking. Hi, Yuri. He's asking, what about dissidents like Chinese dissidents like Liu Xiaobo or Ai Weiwei or Jimmy Lai? First, let's get the giggles out of the way. Jimmy Lai. Let's start with Jimmy Lai. Isn't he a billionaire?
Yes.
Yeah. He's a billionaire, like magnate, like media magnate. Like he runs Apple News out of Hong Kong, and I think he was recently arrested, wasn't he, or something?
He's he was arrested. Okay, I should laugh. But he was arrested in jail for new criminal charges for trying to funnel sort of like some of the Hong Kong pro democracy protesters in Hong Kong, trying to find them an escape path to Taiwan. So he's faced several charges for breaching the national security law, which obviously just came in last year and faced a whole load of controversy. But again, it's just one of those instances where Jimmy Lai is a billionaire. We don't need to be sympathizing with billionaires of all people. His interests are not our own. And the fact that he's funding these protests should tell us that there's probably something very, very wrong with them. Just in the sense that if Elon Musk suddenly started funding a campaign or a movement in the US, for example, alarm bells would be ringing, because as we all know, he promised, he promised Flint that he would fix their water problems like 5 years ago. Till this day, they have no such support from him. It's all just a facade. Same with Jimmy Lai. He doesn't really care about the lives of young people, of advancing freedoms in Hong Kong. He has his own agendas. He has his own investors lining his pockets.
Yeah.
Yep.
Also, when you have these dissidents, we have to remember that the United States has a long history of weaponizing immigrants, weaponizing minorities, weaponizing especially immigrants from countries like Cuba, Venezuela, the former Soviet Union, now China. Basically, the United States, the religion in the United States actually is anti-communism. That's their religion.
Yes.
That's the unquestioned religion that they all believe in, at least most of them. And they will weaponize any immigrant. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I said that's something like we didn't even get to that point. Like the idea of a lot of this being anti-communist in nature as well, right? Like everything that's going on.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Or I mean, let's say they're very pro exploitation, very pro imperialism. So imperialism, they know that is why they're able to continue to act like they rule the world. So they want to make sure that they invite people who are willing to play along with that narrative. So I think that's why we see the same thing with Gary Kasparov. We see the same thing with Ai Weiwei. I mean, we see the same thing where if they're willing to go along with Western chauvinism, West is best, capitalism is great, then they're welcome to be, they'll be given platforms, they're going to win awards, they're going to get grants, they're going to get all kinds of things, they're going to get published, you're going to get, on the New York Times bestsellers list, but only if you're willing to sell out your people, only if you're willing to spread anti-communism. That's the only way you're acceptable.
Be a tool for the propaganda war machine, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, it's the same thing with like defectors from North Korea or DPRK. It's a similar thing from Cuba, So if you look at the pattern of behavior, I think it all kind of checks out that way. Huey also said in the chat that Jimmy Lai's personal aide is an ex-CIA agent.
Well, I saw that.
Yeah, and again, speaking of the CIA, Liu Xiaobo is another great example of, he was literally on the CIA payroll. You can literally Google this right now. So he was very, very much entrenched in the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989. He was a key instigator, and he was essentially paid to instigate riots, to basically get all the young people on his side. He was, a coordinator. He was mobilizing forces in Tiananmen Square, because he was being instructed and paid to do so. And he's also made like some horrible comments. He's a Nobel Peace Prize winner, but he has said things like, China needs to undergo another 300 years of colonialism before it can reach anywhere near the same stage as Hong Kong or even Britain. So people like him, you have to really question their motives and their agendas. And it just plays into this whole catch-22 situation where the Chinese are all apparently brainwashed and under the CPC, and, they're all under authoritarian figures, so they don't do anything. They don't get to choose what it is they believe or whatever. But on the other hand, when people do dissent from that, people are suddenly so shocked and surprised, like, whoa, there's someone who suddenly has a different opinion, even though the belief is that all Chinese people all believe the same thing. So it's just another example of how there's so many, double standards on China when it comes to how their democracy is run, on how their government is supposed to be run, on how people are supposed to perceive their government. Because in any country in the world, where is it that every single person has the exact same view of their country? Even in the DPRK in North Korea, for example, they have three main parties that make up their sort of parliament, and multiple other parties that don't have such an influence. Even China has, I think it's like 17, 18 parties the last time I checked. And again, they all form the National People's Congress. They all get represented, but to the West, it's all CPC. But again, it's just like the UK government. We allegedly have an opposition party to the conservative led government. But then do we say, oh, it's authoritarian rule under the Conservative Party? No, we don't. We see criticisms of the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, every single day, because he is what I think Galdem have called a wet wipe. He doesn't do anything.
Wet wipe. I love that.
That's great.
Okay, I'm going to use that one for something else. I love it. So there was some Huey. Thanks for those links as well, Huey, in the chat. But Huey said, do we believe that America's anti-China propaganda campaign is the last-ditch effort to stop China's rise?
Yeah. Yeah.
My gut wants to say yeah, but I mean, I think that might be too of a simplistic answer.
Well, I think that the United States and its allies, the Western, white, colonial, European-based, colonial, literally. I mean, if you look at it, it's Japan and a bunch of white countries. Like it's literally like the Five Eyes, which is US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, or I don't even think New Zealand's part of it. Japan, right? So it's like these four countries, the colonial masters, and Japan, which is also a colonial, which also has its own imperialist issues. Yeah. So, what I'm saying is like these countries, and at the head of it is the United States, I think are afraid of losing the hegemony of the world on the world, and that includes financial, political, cultural. New Zealand is part of the Five Eyes. Okay, I didn't know that. So these especially these these not, I wouldn't say former colonial countries, because they're still colonial countries, settler colonial states, they're, you know, for them, an Asian country getting to a point where they have better roads and better technology and better telecommunications and have, you know, are setting up a base on the moon and have been exploring the far side of the moon and have a probe going out to Mars. Like, these are not things that non-white people are supposed to do, right? We're just, our role in this world is to serve the white man and to kind of just do what the white man wants us to do. And the only time we get put on a pedestal is when we serve the white man's needs.
Yeah.
So it's like
when we're victims.
Yeah, or we're victims, or we can be tokenized. We can be tokenized in some way, you know, and we can be used by liberals to say how liberal and how nice they are. Look how inclusive they are because they allow for diversity. Look at this black person. Look at this Asian person, you know. So our role is to serve white supremacy. And if we're not doing that, then the people who run these countries and the corporations around that actually run the countries, they get very uncomfortable. I do think that white supremacy is that, I mean, I think that there's a class issue, but I think that along with that, there is an actual white supremacy issue. I think they are much more likely to
all connected
believe a white person, like what you were saying, Fiona, that even those people who are on our side of this argument, the only people who get any kind of coverage or any kind of you know, who get the kind of visibility are usually white people. The white people who happen to be, you know, smart and like wiser than others, but they're still, you know, you still, you know, Asians are not allowed to speak for Asians are allowed to speak for yourselves, and things like that. So absolutely, I think that China's rise is a threat, not just because it's China's rise, but because China is also empowering countries in Africa, countries around Asia, and countries in Latin America. Right. So they just signed a big, huge trade deal with Iran. Okay. Like worth billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. Meanwhile, the US has been sanctioning the shit out of Iran. During a pandemic, they increased sanctions on Iran. They made sure that Iran was sanctioned more during the pandemic. They're fucking cruel. You know, it's just cruel. And meanwhile, China is signing deals. China sent doctors to Iran. China sent medical equipment to Iran. And now China has signed a huge deal with Iran.
And
so
there's also the vaccine diplomacy that China's doing too is
well, on that, because I wanted to, you know, take this discussion in a positive note. So I thought we could share some statistics about that. But yeah.
You have them. Excellent.
Good. I have some statistics about that. Yeah.
And I saw too that Fiona has, you mentioned some updates on Xinjiang policies. Did you want to mention?
Yes. So just a few days ago at the 46th session of the UN Human Rights Council, so Cuba made a statement on behalf of 64 countries this time in support of China's position on Xinjiang related matters. And typically these countries are all countries in the global south. And there were a few countries obviously against it, but the number of opposing countries, I don't have the exact number, but the number of opposing countries was only ever maybe about 30. But now that number has gone right down as less and less countries want to basically be in opposition to China because they've realized that this is, you know, it is not a winning battle. 64 countries, a lot of the Muslim countries, part of the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, have come out in direct support. Some countries have even come out individually. So on top of the 64, multiple other countries have come out to say, well, yeah, no, we support China in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Sort of like, I don't think Indonesia has put on support, but Sudan, the DPRK, just so many countries across the global south. And again, there is this argument that, okay, so maybe the reason why so many Muslim countries are supporting China is because they are being financially coerced by China, and China will sanction them or do something to them if they don't agree. Now, where in the past few decades do we have an example of China doing that? Of China deciding to go and sanction a global south country, of, you know, deciding to punish a country in the global south for opposing their view at the United Nations? I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, like please correct me if I'm wrong, But China does not work in that way. It doesn't use threats or bullying as a tactic to form relationships with other countries. And again, it's very chauvinistic to believe that all these countries just want to bow down to China and will be subservient to China. Do they not have their own autonomy? Are they not also like self-determined countries?
Exactly.
Why is it that colonized nations and countries in the global south are presumed to always be submissive to a bigger power? And again, it plays into this trope of yellow peril. China, it's a massive country, it's preying on all these countries around it, when on the other hand, you have the US, who actually does regularly sanction, bomb, blockade a multitude of these countries for not agreeing to let them, have trade in their country or let proxies into their country. So again, it's very transparent what the aims of a lot of these criticisms are, especially from the left, because they're all in bad faith. There's no way to basically say that, all these countries that voted in support of China are being coerced by China, without basically implying that you believe that China has some mystical control over the whole world that no one else seems to know about.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent points. Excellent.
Yeah, I think that the whole thing is that, I mean, China does business with almost every country in the world. China does not. In fact, in some cases, you can argue sometimes maybe it's some countries they should pull back. But China has a very non-interventionist policy, right? In just general, their foreign policy is very non-interventionist, and so they will do business with any country that's willing to do business with them on fair terms, fair and equal terms. So I think that it's completely ridiculous for anyone to think that China is just holding these countries hostage, and somehow forcing them to. No, they know that China is doing good business, that China is willing to help them and also do business, trade, commerce, which is something that is, a normal part of human society, right? When it comes to the vaccines, China has donated a lot of vaccines. China has also sold a lot of vaccines, and like to 150 countries. I was looking up some statistics.
China has hoarding vaccines, that's for sure.
So
Canada.
This one, I'm going to share my screen here, and then we'll talk about it.
Sorry, Kieran, I just had to jump in there because Canada's been accused of that. So is the States, anyways.
Oh, Canada is definitely hoarding vaccines. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
Canada and the US are hoarding vaccines. The US is the worst of it. So this is so China has basically exported almost half, 48% of their vaccines to other countries. The US has exported 0%, and the UK has exported 0%, and I think Canada has also exported 0%.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's absolutely disgusting that these countries, they're purveyors of human rights. They're so proud to say that, make statements about human rights abuses in other countries. But this in itself, they're basically blocking the ability for other countries to buy vaccines, plus refusing to, I think it was, they've refused to lift the patent on them, so other countries can't produce them even if they wanted to. I'm sorry, that's a human rights abuse. It's how many thousands and millions of lives are being put at risk because these rich countries want to hoard it all to themselves and still not have, stringent COVID-19 policies. They're still having death rates in the hundreds of thousands. And it's criminal. It's disgusting.
Yeah. And speaking of human rights, I wanted to highlight that China recently, just a couple of days ago, released a report on the human rights situation in the United States. And I highly recommend reading that. I'll put a link to it in the, there's actually I'll put a link to it in here in the chat so that people can read that. You can read the full text there. At that link. So the report highlights a whole bunch of things, including racism within the U.S. and the racist police violence within the U.S. Let me just pull up some of my documentation here on this. Okay,
It's very thorough.
Very thorough. Yeah.
Yeah, it goes into a lot about the pandemic as well, how politicians basically abandoned their responsibilities to the people. how American democracy triggered political chaos, and that the political polarization has grown over the last few years, and there have been no ways to do checks and balances of power, which has led to sort of like even less of a stable government. So a lot of the things that the US have been accusing China of, China have very rightfully pointed out that, well, if you look at yourself in the mirror, there's a lot of issues that have stemmed even from the Obama era. They've pointed out the ethnic minorities have been sort of their rights have been violated, and they've even mentioned that the Ku Klux Klan have been, have experienced a rise in membership throughout the past decades or so.
Yeah. I also was reading in the UK, 95% of the doctors that have died of COVID are Black, Asian, and minority ethnicities.
Mm-hmm. And 30% of nurses who have died from COVID are all Filipino. And I think, as I mentioned, did I mention last time? I can't remember. But the majority of nurses that have been exported, well, quote unquote, exported to the rest of the world during the course of the COVID pandemic, they have been from the Philippines, who has been suffering a severe nursing shortage of their own. But instead, they're nurses for reasons I'm sure that are personal to themselves, but also because of financial coercion. They have been essentially forced to go to these Western countries where their lives are not at all valued, where they do not receive any adequate support or payment compensation for their labor, and they have died on the line, and they have left, vulnerable families back home in the global South who have relied on them for income. And again, this is all part and parcel of imperialism. Black and brown people of color, like we're making up the huge proportions of those who are dying from COVID-19, and many of us are also disabled. So it's beyond sort of human rights crisis at this point. How, in what other instances, I don't know how it is in the States at the moment, but we've surpassed 120,000 confirmed COVID-related deaths, and there's estimates that this figure is tens of thousands, perhaps even 100,000 more, because it is discounting deaths related to COVID that exceed 28 days. So for example, if someone has been in a coma for more than 28 days as a result of COVID and they die, they're not counted.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I know, Moxie, you posted something about Pfizer and Argentina. Do you want to just go into that quickly?
Yeah, I know it just goes back to what we were mentioning earlier. Like Pfizer was trying to bully Argentina and other Latin American countries, but Argentina was like, oh, give us access to your water and your fish and some other natural resources, and you can have our vaccine, right? So using it as like this bully tool to get their hands on and exploiting natural resources in Latin America. It's just disgusting. It's really disgusting. And it's, and that in Canada, that's actually the vaccine I got. And it's like, we don't really have a choice but to get these big pharma. Anyway, this is a whole other topic, but it also ties into the vaccine diplomacy that we were talking about, right? And corporations always having this immense power when it comes to Canada, the US, and the UK.
And as they were talking about on the Daniel Dumbrell show as well, the whole idea of vaccine diplomacy is very like it's supposed to be a pejorative term, like, oh, China is not, they don't really mean it, they're just doing it as part of like some nefarious scheme to like give people vaccinations.
The yellow peril strikes again.
Yeah. It's like, no matter how China could, I saw something on CGTN, one of the people who was on there said that if China were to cure mortality, if China were to cure death and make people immortal, the West would accuse it of overpopulating the earth.
Yeah,
like there
totally.
is literally nothing that China can do that at this point the West will acknowledge, because it's an existential crisis for white supremacy. It's not even the West. I mean, we could all live in peace together. China is not out to control the world. China is not out to take over. It really isn't. If you study it and you actually pay attention in good faith and you actually like watch and read what the CPC is doing and what Chinese people are doing, that's not their nowhere in there, like that's not what they're like, and that's not part of like Chinese civilization. Chinese civilization has always been very self-contained, and like the goal has always been to be like self-sustaining, it's never been about expansionism. So the West is basically just projecting its own, like the West was colonial, so it imagines that China is also trying to colonize everybody. So I think that's really what's going on. But anything else before we wrap up today? We're about an hour and 18 minutes in.
I would like to mention that I'm extremely impressed and proud with China and them coming out and sanctioning places for spreading a bunch of lies and misinformation about them. So yeah, good. You know, what do you expect? Do you expect China to just continue to sit back and forever act with utter diplomacy when the rest of the West isn't? So yeah, kudos to China. I'm just saying that, and I was like, keep it up, because it's really like coming out with the human rights report, the human rights abuses report. Thank you. Yeah, point out the hypocrisy and the contradictions of the West, and slapping sanctions on some of these people in Canada and the UK, and yeah, do it.
Yeah,
yeah.
They
what do you expect?
They sanctioned somebody in Canada, right? What's his name?
Yeah, somebody mentioned that in the comments. Mark Garneau?
Mark McGrath?
No, is it Mark Garneau? I think the Rogue Diva put it in the comment section.
Oh, okay.
I need to read up about that a little more before I can make any comments on that. But yeah, I mean, feel free to send some links, folks, in the chat if you know something.
Yeah, I mean, I've been meaning to look up. It's just there's been so much other stuff, but yeah, I know. I was like, okay, yay! Only one person though. I mean, Canada has kidnapped Meng Wanzhou and is keeping her under house arrest for no reason. So Michael Chong, Vinny says Michael Chong. Thank you, Vinny. Okay. So, I mean, I don't know who that person is, but I'm sure China has good reasons. So, but I mean, it's about fucking time. It's about time that somebody slapped these people back. And that whole thing that happened in Alaska last week, a week ago, they met the U.S. delegation met with the Chinese delegation, and the U.S. delegation started off with like accusing China of all kinds of things, which is totally against diplomatic protocol. And the Chinese delegation hit back, and they were like, "You're not in a position of authority.
That was such a good video.
You are? Who do you think you are, right? Like, you're not speaking from a position of strength." And I was actually reading that was actually a very like a euphemism, because what the actual person said was actually a lot more spicier than that. But the translator, I don't speak Mandarin yet, unfortunately. I'm trying to learn. Yeah. So, I mean, these things, I think Biden is continuing the same old bullshit. And, he's, I don't think it's going to work. I mean, what's happening is happening.
He's trying to create an alternative to Belt and Road Initiative. Apparently, he called Boris Johnson, I think it was yesterday or today, saying that Western countries should form a counter initiative to Belt and Road to provide help to developing nations.
Oh man!
I mean, I have no doubt that will fail miserably and will never come into fruition. But you know what? It's
I mean, how many
they want to talk about it?
Yeah. How many things? I wish they would compete on this, really do. But how many things are wrong with that statement? First of all, the infrastructure in the U.S. is falling apart, right? The bridges are falling apart. The roads are falling. Same thing in Canada. Like if you actually go to China, I recommend everybody go to China as soon as the pandemic is over. Just buy a fucking ticket and go to China. I'm telling you, you will never regret it. You will not regret it. Okay? Because you will see things that you will not believe. You will be like, holy shit, I've been lied to all this time. It will blow your mind. I guarantee it. Go to China. And when you see the infrastructure in China and then you come back to Canada or the US and you see what's happening with the infrastructure here, and it's just like, holy shit. What do where is this, the austerity and everything has destroyed these countries. They're like hollowed out. And these people, they're going to start a competitor to Belt and Road. Give me a fucking break. Why don't you fix your own? Why don't you get a Belt and Road in your own country first, right?
Exactly.
Honestly.
This was a great, there was so many places that we went to in this discussion today, and there's so much more that we could talk about. So Fiona, that means you're coming back on.
always.
I hope you're up for it, Fiona.
Yeah, no, definitely. I love coming to just have a rant essentially about all the things that are going disastrously wrong in the West and what China's doing right. Like it's nice to have some positive news to talk about, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. And you don't get that kind of, in most places online or anywhere, you're not going to get that. It's all China bad, China bad, China bad. Like they're really trying hard. They're so desperate to make people believe this, right? Yeah. I almost would feel bad for them if they weren't so evil. But yeah.
I think it's quite scary in a way as well. I don't know if scary is the word, but just disappointing maybe that so many Western leftists, like even like people of color, they're all buying into this whole xenophobic sort of rhetoric of, China bad, China evil, China this, China that, without even bothering to interrogate any of the sources, without making the links to sort of like the CIA, which, there's always that joke that, tankies always blame everything on the CIA. But then the documents are right there that say the CIA has been involved in basically everything. So,
or like Colonel Wilkerson saying it on camera.
They say it. They say it themselves. They tell us exactly what it is they're doing, and yet there seems to be some sort of obstacle, some sort of veil that's preventing people from acknowledging that our countries are making shit up about all these countries in the global south as they have always done. And, I think there's been some discourse on Twitter recently with the 18th anniversary of the Iraq War on, how many people would have believed and bought into the whole sort of weapons of mass destruction and the whole human rights abuses thing back then that the US is propagating. And I don't know, I feel like if Twitter existed back then, we'd be in a very similar position as to where we are with China at the moment, where there'd just be a lot of propaganda from the West and a fight to push back against a lot of it. Obviously, there were huge anti-war movements at the time, but again, we look at the state of the anti-war movement today, and it's all empty platitudes. They say they're anti-war, but they support very imperialist policies for the most part. There are great orgs out there, but for the most part, they're not on the side of the global south. They're on the side of whoever's funding them to exist.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And oh shit, I had a thought, now it's gone. I think that a lot of people get, it's very easy to get conditioned by all of this media, like all those weird fucking claws and shit that we were just looking at with the anti-China propaganda. And it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It is like we're surrounded by it all the time. It's on CBC. CBC is the Canadian broadcast, this Canadian national network. And it's on BBC, and it's everywhere. And it's like, you can't escape it. So if you, at some point you start like, either agreeing with it because you want to be accepted within that circle, within your peers, within your coworkers, your whoever, and or you just start like at least feeling like you're alone. If you don't believe it, then you feel alone, right? And so it's really important for people like this kind of show to happen so that people know that they're not alone. I think that's another important part. So
something I just wanted to sort of like I just remembered actually, but what you were saying as well about the whole sort of tokens when Chinese diaspora, Chinese dissidents or whatever are wheeled out to write all these pieces that are anti-China. Like I feel like that's it's a huge part of liberal identity politics in the sense that, if someone is a certain color or a certain race or something, they are then given the authority to speak on say, for example, for China, but it's with the agenda of the white supremacists. It's with the agenda of the settler colonial states. And one example of that was at my own students' union at Goldsmiths University. It was, there are pro-democracy Hong Kong protesters. They've put an exhibition up. You've got Trump, you've got anti-Semitism, you've got Nazi apologia, you've got Japanese imperialism apologia, all up on the walls, all around the building. But because this person has the face of a Chinese face, essentially, and they're from Hong Kong, instantly their view is sided with. It doesn't matter that they have very fascist views and they're pro-colonization. But because they represent the West, they're that representative, automatically you identify with them, you believe them, they become the voice of, millions of Chinese people. And I think this is something we have to be so careful about.
And that's
debunk.
why identity politics without a class analysis, it feeds
Mhm.
into all of these imperialist motivations too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Exactly. That's exactly what it is. We need to keep an eye on that. Just because somebody is from somewhere doesn't mean, I mean, representation is important to some degree, but I think
Yes.
that we need to be careful with making representation the be all and end all of everything. You know, we
Exactly.
have to have other analyses in there.
Yeah, someone's class position, for example. I think a lot of dissidents, you'll notice in the media as well, particularly on China, they are from very privileged, like old money, new money type backgrounds,
Mhm.
and so they're completely distanced from like peasants and workers in China, in rural China, whose lives have completely been overturned in the past decade. They're completely isolated from even the issues of poverty. Like I think I read somewhere that in New York City, the ethnic group with the highest homelessness rates was, it was the Chinese community. And it's all these issues that are completely stripped from the mainstream media and anything reported on it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think we should wrap up for today. But thank you so much. I think we had a good discussion.
Really.
I hope that our listeners got something out of it. We talked about statistics and anti-China hatred and the anti-Asian hatred that it feeds. And hopefully we can see you again, Fiona, soon.
Yeah.
And thank you again for last time too. You were just a big font of information and knowledge. And thank you again for coming and bringing your awesome self and sharing your insights with us. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for
And
having me. It's been great.
I completely echo what Kieran said, and I do know that we had quite a bit of feedback from our viewers and our supporters expressing gratitude for you being on the show last time as well. So thanks again.
Always glad
In
to
the
be
meantime, thank you. I'm going to encourage folks to follow us. Please subscribe to our channel. The more subscribers we have, the more these live streams will show up on your click the alert, that little alert bell as well beside the subscribe, because then our videos will come up and you'll get notifications when we post things. So please do that. Please encourage your friends to also come and share and join in, and please consider donating us. You can even buy Fiona a coffee. You buy her a coffee, you say, I'd like to buy Fiona a coffee. We're more than happy to send her that coffee money, no problem at all. And it's buymeacoffee.com/redlifepodcast.com. Kieran, is that accurate? That's right, right?
Yes.
And then
Buy me a
Kieran,
coffee.
and the Patreon is Patreon
I
/
put patreon.com. Yep.
Thank you. Yeah.
Let me just see if I can pull that up and put it on the screen here. Patreon is this.
Oh, look
that's
at that.
Buy Me a
Woo!
Coffee. There you go.
Oh, I like that. That looks good. Thanks. All right. So thank you. And of course, it was always great seeing you, Kieran, and chatting with you. And thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for listening and watching. We'll see you next time. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.